The sound of twisting metal is something you never forget. It isn't just a noise, it is a vibration that travels through your teeth and settles deep in your marrow. I remember the screech of tires, the blinding midday sun reflecting off a chrome bumper, and then the world turning sideways. When I woke up, the white ceiling tiles of the hospital room were swimming in a haze of antiseptic and pain. My right leg was encased in a contraption of pins and rods that looked more like medieval torture than modern medicine. I was 29 years old, a landscape architect with my own budding firm, and in the span of 3 seconds, my life had been dismantled. The surgeon, a weary man named Dr. Henderson, told me the damage was catastrophic. Crush injury, he called it. The nerves were severed, the bone shattered. There was a surgery, a complex nerve grafting and reconstruction procedure that could save the leg and potentially restore my ability to walk without a cane. But it was considered elective by my basic catastrophic insurance plan. The cost was $150,000 up front. I wasn't worried, not at first. My last name was Sterling. My father, Bradford Sterling, and my mother, Phyllis, sat on the boards of half the charities in the tri-state area. We were the kind of family that had a library named after us at the local university. I assumed, with the naive trust of a daughter who had never truly tested the depths of her parents' conditional love, that they would help. They arrived 3 hours after I woke up. Phyllis was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that looked impossibly crisp, given the humidity outside. Bradford was checking his watch. They didn't rush to the bedside to hold my hand. They stood at the foot of the bed looking at my suspended leg with an expression of distaste, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been delivered damaged. "Well, Lorraine," my father said, his voice carrying that boardroom baritone that commanded silence in every room. "You've certainly made a mess of things this time." "I was hit by a truck, Dad," I whispered, my throat dry. "He ran a red light. The doctor says I need a specific surgery. It's expensive. My insurance won't cover the specialist." My mother sighed, adjusting the pearl clasp on her handbag. "We spoke to the doctor in the hall. We know the cost dear." "I can pay you back," I pleaded, the pain medication making me foggy, but panic cutting through the haze. "Once I'm back on my feet, once I can take on the corporate contracts again." Bradford held up a hand. "Lorraine, we have had this conversation since you insisted on going into gardening instead of finance. You wanted independence. You wanted to live by your own means. If we bail you out now, what lesson are you learning? That recklessness has no cost." Recklessness. I tried to sit up, but agony spiked through my hip. "I was driving to a client meeting. It was an accident." "It is a lack of foresight," Phyllis added, her tone cool and educational. "You chose a career with unstable income and poor benefits. You chose to live in the city. Now you expect us to liquidate assets to fix a mistake of circumstance. We have a fiscal responsibility to the estate, Lorraine. We can't just throw 6 figures at a problem because you didn't plan better." "I might lose the use of my leg," I said, tears finally spilling over. "I won't be able to work the sites. I'll lose my business." "Then perhaps you should have become a lawyer like your sister Charlene," Bradford said, checking his watch again. "We will pay for your hospital stay until discharge. That is generous enough. But the specialist surgery number. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Or I suppose learn to live with the consequences if you can't." They left 10 minutes later to make a dinner reservation at the club. I watched the door close, realizing that the metal crushing my leg hurt less than the icy silence they left behind. 6 months later, the world I knew had shrunk to the size of a 400-square-foot basement apartment in a part of town my mother would never visit without a bodyguard. I had lost the business. Without the reconstruction surgery, my recovery had been slow and incomplete. I walked with a heavy, agonizing limp, relying on a cane that made me look 30 years older than I was. The nerve pain was a constant companion, a dull electric hum that flared into white-hot lightning if I moved too quickly. My savings had evaporated in the first month of physical therapy, the cheap kind, not the specialized rehabilitation I needed. I had sold my drafting table, my equipment, and even my grandmother's vintage brooch, just to pay the deposit on this damp apartment. The windows were ground level, looking out at the ankles of pedestrians rushing by. It was fitting, really. I felt like I was watching the human race participate in a marathon I had been disqualified from. I was sitting at my small, wobbly kitchen table, sorting through a stack of final notices when my phone buzzed. It was a social media notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a post from my sister Charlene. The photo showed Charlene standing in the driveway of our parents' sprawling estate. She was beaming, wearing a tailored navy dress that likely cost more than my current rent for the year. Behind her sat a gleaming, brand-new Porsche convertible with a giant red bow on the hood. The caption read, "So grateful to Mom and Dad for this incredible gift to celebrate my promotion to Senior VP. Hard work pays off. Hashtag, blessed hashtag, Sterling Legacy." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Charlene was 26. She worked at Sterling Holdings, the family investment firm founded by our grandmother. Her hard work consisted of showing up to an office our father managed, sitting in meetings our mother arranged, and signing paperwork prepared by paralegals. The injustice wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical weight in my chest. They had refused me $150,000 to save my mobility, claiming fiscal responsibility, yet they had just dropped nearly the same amount on a toy for Charlene because she accepted a title they handed her. My phone rang, startling me. It was Phyllis. "Lorraine," she said, her voice lacking any preamble. "We haven't heard from you in weeks. I assume you're settled in that efficiency unit?" "It's a basement, Mother," I said, my voice tight. "And yes, I'm here. I saw Charlene's car." "Isn't it marvelous?" Phyllis gushed. "She's showing such promise at the firm. Your father is very proud. We're thinking of putting her on the fast track for the board of directors next year." "That's nice," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "I'm calling because I need to know if you can co-sign a lease modification for me. My landlord wants a guarantor because my income is inconsistent right now." "Oh, Lorraine," she sighed, the sound of disappointment crackling down the line. "We discussed this. We aren't going to enable you. If you can't afford the apartment, perhaps you should look into government housing or find a job that accommodates your limitations. Have you considered data entry, something seated?" "I am a landscape architect," I said through gritted teeth. "I design living spaces. I just need a little more time to heal." "You need a reality check," she snapped. "We have a dinner next Tuesday. Come over. Maybe seeing Charlene's success will inspire you to stop wallowing." She hung up before I could say no. I looked at the eviction warning on the table and the picture of the Porsche on my phone. I realized I had no choice. I had to go to beg for scraps at the table I used to sit at. The drive to the Sterling estate took 40 minutes in my beat-up sedan, a car that rattled ominously every time I hit 40 miles per hour. Pulling up the long gravel driveway felt like entering a different country. The lawns were manicured to perfection, ironic, considering I used to give the groundskeeper advice on the hydrangeas. Now I parked my rusting car behind Charlene's gleaming Porsche and struggled to get out. The walk to the front door was a gauntlet. My right leg dragged the cane, clicking rhythmically against the stone pavers. By the time I reached the foyer, I was sweating from the exertion. The butler, a man named Henderson, who had known me since I was a child, looked at me with open pity as he took my coat. "Good evening, Miss Lorraine," he murmured. "You look tired." "I'm fine, Henderson," I lied. Dinner was served in the formal dining room beneath the crystal chandelier that my grandmother Estelle had bought in Paris in the 60s. Bradford sat at the head, Phyllis at the foot, with Charlene and me on opposite sides. The distance between us felt like miles. "So," Bradford started cutting into his medium-rare steak. "How is life in the underground? Have you found gainful employment yet?" "I'm doing freelance sketches," I said, keeping my eyes on my plate. "But the medical bills are piling up. The physical therapy isn't covered anymore. Dad, I wanted to ask, not for a gift but a loan. Just $5,000 to cover the rent and the next round of therapy. I'll sign a contract. I'll pay interest." Charlene chuckled, swirling her red wine. Alone, Lori, you still owe me $40 for lunch from 3 years ago. This is different, Charlene, I snapped. Is it? Phyllis interjected. Lorraine, we are in the middle of planning the 40th anniversary jubilee. Do you have any idea what the catering costs? The tent rental alone is astronomical. We have to maintain standards. Every dollar is allocated to the event. It's a networking opportunity for the firm. You bought a Porsche, I said, my voice rising. You bought a sports car, but you can't lend your injured daughter rent money. Bradford slammed his fork down. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. Do not count other people's money, Lorraine. It is vulgar. Charlene earned that car by contributing to the family legacy. You chose to leave. You chose to go play in the dirt. And now that you're broken, you come crawling back expecting us to patch you up. You are becoming a leech, and I will not tolerate a leech at my table. Building character, Phyllis murmured, taking a sip of wine. We are doing this because we love you, dear. If we help you now, you'll never be strong. I am in constant pain, I shouted, pushing my chair back. It scraped loudly against the hardwood. I walk with a cane at 29. I don't need character. I need help. Then help yourself, Bradford said coldly. And while we are on the subject for the Jubilee, try to dress appropriately, and perhaps sit during the cocktail hour. Seeing you hobble around is distressing for the guests. I stood up, trembling, gripping my cane until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, but I was broke, disabled, and exhausted. I turned and limped out of the room, the sound of Charlene's quiet laughter following me down the hall. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, a knock rattled the door of my basement apartment. I froze. I was expecting the landlord with an eviction notice. I pulled my robe tighter, grabbed my cane, and shuffled to the door. When I opened it, I didn't find a landlord. I found a petite woman with snow-white hair sitting in a motorized wheelchair wrapped in a heavy wool coat. Behind her stood a driver holding a large umbrella to shield her from the drizzle. "Grandma Estelle," I gasped. "Well, are you going to let me in? Or do I have to catch pneumonia out here in this gutter?" She said, her voice raspy but sharp as a tack. I stepped back wide-eyed. Grandma Estelle was 86. She lived in the guest cottage on the main estate. For the last 5 years, Bradford and Phyllis had largely dismissed her. They told everyone she was confused, frail, and sundowning. They treated her like a relic that needed to be dusted occasionally, but mostly ignored. The driver helped her maneuver the wheelchair over the threshold and into my cramped living room. He left to wait in the car. "Grandma, what are you doing here? How did you even find me?" I asked, clearing a stack of unpaid bills off the only armchair so she could park next to it. "I may be old, Lorraine, but I'm not dead," she said, looking around the room. Her eyes, usually clouded with cataracts, seemed surprisingly clear today. She took in the peeling paint, the meager kitchenette, and finally my leg. "Your father tells me you're finding yourself. He says you're on a bohemian sabbatical." I let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what he calls it? I'm broke, Grandma. I'm crippled because they wouldn't help me with the surgery, and now I'm about to lose this place." Estelle's face hardened. "He refused the surgery. He told me the doctors said it was impossible. He said you chose not to have it." My jaw dropped. "He lied. It was money. He said it wasn't fiscally responsible." Estelle stayed silent for a long time. She reached into her purse and pulled out a pack of Virginia Slims. She hadn't smoked in 20 years as far as I knew. She didn't light one, just held it between her fingers. "I started Sterling Holdings with one truck and a lot of grit in 1968, she said softly. "Your grandfather was the charm, but I was the spine. When I passed the control to Bradford, I thought I had taught him the value of family. Not money. Family." "He loves the family name," I said. "He just doesn't seem to like the people in it." "He thinks I'm senile," Estelle said, a mischievous glint appearing in her eye. "He talks in front of me like I'm a houseplant. He and that mother of yours discuss things they shouldn't." She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was like paper, but her grip was iron. I have been watching Lorraine. I watched them buy that German car for Charlene. I watched them plan this ridiculous jubilee while their own daughter lives in a cellar. I don't know what to do, Grandma, I whispered, the fight draining out of me. You do exactly what you're doing, she said firmly. You survive, and you come to the jubilee. It's mandatory. Can you promise me that? I don't want to go. They told me to hide my cane. Let them talk, Estelle said. You come, and you hold your head up. I have a feeling the anniversary party is going to be memorable. She signaled the driver to return. Before she left, she pressed a check into my hand. It wasn't for millions. It was for $5,000. For the rent, she said. Consider it a loan if it makes your pride feel better, but don't tell your father. The invitation for the sterling ruby jubilee arrived on heavy cardstock with gold leaf lettering. It weighed about as much as a brick. It wasn't really an invitation, it was a summons. My attendance was required to complete the tableau of the perfect family. The week leading up to the party was a nightmare of anxiety. Phyllis called me 3 times not to ask how I was, but to coordinate my appearance. Wear the long teal dress, she instructed during the second call. It hides the unevenness of your gait. And for heaven's sake, Lorraine, get your hair blown out professionally. We have investors coming from Tokyo and London. We cannot look like we have a straggler in the ranks. I'll do my best, Mother, I said, eyeing the cane leaning against my wall. I had bought a new one with the money Grandma gave me, a sleek black carbon fiber model. It wasn't the wooden stick I had been using. It looked dangerous. And about the cane, Phyllis added, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do you really need it? Can't you just hold onto a chair or sit down immediately? If I don't use it, I fall down, I said bluntly. Fine, just stay in the background. Don't circulate. Charlene is going to be making a speech about the future of the company, and we want the focus on her vitality. Vitality. The word stung. Charlene was the picture of health, success, and compliance. I was the cautionary tale. The morning of the Jubilee, the sun was shining with an aggressive brightness that felt mocking. I dressed in the teal gown. It was elegant, but it felt like a costume. I applied my makeup like war paint. I looked at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. My eyes were tired, but there was something else there, something that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Grandma Estelle's visit had ignited a tiny spark of defiance. I wasn't going there to beg anymore. I was going because the woman who built the empire had asked me to. I took a cab to the estate to avoid the embarrassment of my rusting car being seen by the valets. As we turned into the gates, I saw the transformation. The grounds were spectacular. Enormous white tents peaked like mountains on the great lawn. Waiters in tuxedos were already circulating with champagne. It was a display of wealth so vast it felt obscene, knowing that the hosts had haggled with their daughter over medical bills. I paid the driver and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my orthopedic dress shoe. I gripped my black cane. Showtime, I whispered to myself. The garden party was in full swing by the time I navigated the path to the main terrace. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the gazebo. It was a scene from a magazine, perfect and soulless. I hadn't taken 5 steps before Phyllis intercepted me. She moved with the speed of a heat-seeking missile. You're here, she said, her eyes scanning me for flaws. She frowned at the cane but didn't comment. Good. The dress fits. Now listen. Table 14 is yours. It's near the catering entrance under the shade of the elms. It will be cooler for you there. You mean it's where no one will see me, I said. Don't start, Lorraine. This day is about your father and me, and the company. Just eat some shrimp and smile if anyone looks your way. She patted my arm, a gesture devoid of affection, and turned back to the crowd. Oh, Ambassador, so glad you could make it. I made my way to table 14. It was indeed far from the action, populated by a few distant cousins and a deaf great-aunt who smiled at me and pointed to her ear. I sat down, my leg throbbing from the exertion. From my vantage point, I could see Charlene. She was holding court near the fountain wearing a silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. She looked like a princess. Bradford was beside her, introducing her to men in suits who nodded approvingly. She laughed, threw her head back, and touched her father's arm. The perfect daughter. The one who didn't break. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mr. Abernathy, the family attorney. He was a man of few words, stooped and ancient, who had served Grandma Estelle since the 60s. "Miss Lorraine," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "Good to see you." "Hello, Mr. Abernathy. Enjoying the circus?" "One must always observe the circus carefully," he said enigmatically. "Your grandmother asked if you would be so kind as to ensure she has a clear path to the microphone later. She's sitting over there." He pointed to a spot near the stage. Estelle was parked in her wheelchair, looking small and frail in a floral dress. Bradford and Phyllis were ignoring her completely. "She's going to speak?" I asked. "Dad hates it when she speaks." "Yes," Abernathy said, a hint of a smile touching his thin lips. "He does." At 2 o'clock the music stopped. The chatter died down as Bradford stepped up to the podium on the raised stage. He looked every inch the titan of industry, tan, silver-haired, confident. Phyllis stood beside him, beaming. "Friends, colleagues, family," Bradford began, his voice booming over the speakers. 40 years ago, Phyllis and I started a journey. We took a small family operation and built it into the global powerhouse Sterling Holdings is today. I saw Grandma Estelle flinch slightly in her chair. He was erasing her. He always did. "We built this legacy on strength," Bradford continued, "on resilience, on the refusal to accept failure. In this family, we don't make excuses. We make results." Applause rippled through the crowd. Bradford gestured to Charlene, who glided up the stairs to join them. "And looking to the future, we see that same strength in our daughter, Charlene. She has the sterling grit. She understands that success is a choice. Unlike some." He paused for effect, a practiced orator's trick. His eyes scanned the crowd and landed with laser precision on table 14. On me. "Unlike some who stumble and refuse to get up," he said, his voice dropping to a mock sympathetic register. "We have learned that you cannot carry dead weight if you want to climb the mountain. Some branches break in the storm, and some roots hold fast. Charlene is the root that holds." The silence was excruciating. Hundreds of heads turned to follow his gaze. I felt the heat rise up my neck. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being used as a prop, a foil to make Charlene shine brighter. I was the broken branch. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. I gripped my cane, ready to stand up and limp away to leave this toxic arena forever. "So, raise your glasses," Bradford shouted, pivoting back to the crowd. "To 40 years of strength, to the future." "Excuse me." The voice was shrill, amplified by feedback. It cut through the cheers like a knife. Bradford froze. He looked down. Grandma Estelle had rolled her wheelchair right up to the base of the stairs. She was holding a wireless microphone that Mr. Abernathy must have handed her. "Mother," Bradford hissed, leaning over the podium, his hand covering the mic. "Not now. We are on a schedule." "I said excuse me," Estelle said louder this time. Her voice wasn't weak anymore. It was the voice that had shouted orders at construction crews in 1968. "I think you forgot a few people in that toast, Bradford," the crowd murmured. Phyllis rushed to the edge of the stage, her smile plastered on, but her eyes panicked. "Mother Sterling wants to say hello. She's a bit tired, everyone, please bear with us." "I am not tired, Phyllis," Estelle snapped. "And I am certainly not confused. Stop treating me like a senile old bat." She maneuvered her chair so she faced the crowd. "My son talks about building this company. He talks about grit. But I remember when he called me crying in 1990 because the market crashed and he wanted to sell the assets. I told him to hold. I held the line. I built the foundation this family stands on." Bradford was turning red. "Mother, that is enough. We will take you back to the cottage." He signaled to security. "You touch this chair and I'll run over your toes," Estelle warned the approaching guard. She looked back at the crowd. You talk about strength, Bradford. You talk about broken branches. She pointed a crooked finger at me. That girl there, Lorraine, she was hit by a truck. She was broken in half. And what did you do? You with your millions sitting on the board of the hospital, you refused to pay for the surgery that would have fixed her. A gasp went through the tent. Phyllis looked like she might faint. Charlene stood frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. I heard you, Estelle continued, her voice trembling with rage. I was in the hallway that day. I heard you tell her it wasn't fiscally responsible. I watched you let your own daughter suffer in a basement for 6 months while you bought a Porsche for the other one because she knows how to suck up to you. This is a private matter, Bradford shouted into the podium mic, losing his composure. Cut her mic now. It is not a private matter, Estelle yelled back, her voice overpowering his. Because this company, my company, is based on a trust written by me and my late husband. She lowered the mic slightly, looking at Bradford with pure disappointment. I watched you. I gave you 6 months to fix it. I waited to see if you were a father or a CEO. You chose the money, Bradford. You always choose the money. She turned her head to look for her lawyer. Mr. Abernathy, please come up here. Mr. Abernathy ascended the stairs slowly, carrying a battered leather briefcase. He walked past Bradford, who was now sputtering, and stood next to Estelle. He placed the briefcase on the edge of the stage and opened it. Ladies and gentlemen, Abernathy said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion, as the executor of the Sterling Family Master Trust, I am here to enforce a specific clause enacted by Estelle Sterling in 1985. What clause? Phyllis shrieked. We control the majority shares. You control them conditionally, Abernathy corrected. He pulled out a yellow document. This is the Covenant of Care. It stipulates that the trustees, that is you, Bradford and Phyllis, must demonstrate moral fitness to maintain control of the assets. Specifically, Section 4, Paragraph B. Should the trustees willfully neglect the medical or critical welfare of a direct blood descendant while possessing the means to assist, their status as trustees shall be immediately revoked. Bradford laughed, a nervous barking sound. That's archaic. That won't hold up in court. Neglect is subjective. It is not subjective, Abernathy said, pulling out a second file. I have the affidavit from Dr. Henderson stating the surgery was medically necessary and that you refused payment based on financial reasoning. I have copies of the eviction notices sent to Lorraine, and I have the receipt for the Porsche purchased the same week Lorraine requested a loan for rent. Abernathy looked over his spectacles at the silent crowd. The breach of covenant is clear. The trigger is automatic. You can't do this, Charlene screamed, stepping forward. Daddy is the CEO. Not anymore, Estelle said softly. She looked at her son. You failed the test, Bradford. I didn't want to believe you were this heartless, but you proved it to everyone today. Abernathy handed a paper to Bradford. Effective immediately, the voting shares revert to the secondary beneficiary designated in the original trust. Bradford looked at the paper. His face went pale, draining of all color until he looked like a ghost. He looked up past the crowd directly at table 14. Who? Phyllis whispered. Who is the beneficiary? Estelle smiled, a fierce, triumphant look. The one with the most character. Lorraine. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I sat there, stunned, my hand covering my mouth. The guests turned to look at me again, but this time the look wasn't pity. It was shock. It was awe. I stood up. I grabbed my cane, planted it firmly on the grass, and walked toward the stage. I didn't hide the limp. I didn't look down. I walked through the parted sea of investors and socialites, my head high. When I reached the stage, Bradford looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. Phyllis was weeping silently. Charlene looked at me with a mixture of terror and confusion. Is it true? I asked Abernathy. It is Ms. Sterling, he said. You are now the majority trustee of Sterling Holdings. You control the assets, the board seats, and the family allowances. I looked at my parents. They looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that the power dynamic had flipped in a single heartbeat. Lorraine, Bradford stammered, his voice shaking. We we were just trying to teach you. Don't, I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm, steady. Don't say it was for my own good. I turned to Grandma Estelle. She reached out and took my hand. It's yours, darling. Fix it. Fix the company. And fix your leg. The aftermath was swift. The legal transition took less than a week. My first act as trustee was to cut a check for my surgery. I had the operation 2 weeks later. It was painful and the rehab was brutal, but I had the best doctors in the country. 6 months later, I walked into the Sterling offices without a cane. I still had a faint limp, a reminder of what I survived, but I was standing on my own 2 feet. I didn't kick my parents out of their home. That would have been cruel, and I refused to be like them. However, I did remove them from the board. I put them on a fixed stipend, a generous one, but fixed. When Phyllis complained that she couldn't afford her usual summer tour of Europe, I suggested she look into budgeting to build character. Charlene kept her job, but she had to actually work now. I moved her from the executive suite to the compliance department where she had to read regulations 8 hours a day. She drove the Porsche to work every day, but I noticed she stopped posting about being #blessed. Grandma Estelle lived another 4 years. She spent them watching me turn the company towards sustainable development, using my background in landscape architecture to launch a massive green initiative division. I remember sitting with her in the garden shortly before she passed. "Do you forgive them?" she asked me, watching Bradford pace on the distant terrace, looking bored and powerless. "I don't know if forgive is the right word," I said. "I understand them. They loved the image of family more than the people in it. But I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy. I'd rather use that energy to build something real." Estelle patted my hand. That's the sterling grit I was looking for. My parents thought my accident broke me. They thought refusing to help would force me to bend to their will. But all they did was strip away the fear I had of losing their approval. When you lose everything, you realize you have nothing left to fear. And when you have nothing to fear, you become unstoppable. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that families should stand by each other when times get tough, comment the word justice below. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of truth and triumph. I'm Lorraine, and thanks for listening.